an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, good morning. Here we go. It's the ultimate Monday of April 2023. We flip the calendar next week into May. Be nice if we could just kind of flip the temperatures a little bit. It's still kind of, damp and cool in this part of the world. Although I suspect that's probably good for the garden and all that kind of stuff. Slow, easy spring. We did have that flash of summer a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 days in a row there, where everybody was worried about the blossoms on the magnolia tree. But they seem to be just fine. So here we are. It's Monday, April the 24th. Dave Trafford, now and next for Story Studio Network. And back by popular demand, Josh Colle is with us. And what's your portfolio? Is it infrastructure specifically?
No, more broadly than that. I would say anything that cities or transit agencies need or do, I help them and we help them out with. So it's big infrastructure projects, but it's also, delivering service more efficiently, saving money, which is very top of mind for most cities, especially the one you and I reside in. The other thing is just the whole, way we expect services to be delivered are changing rapidly. I joke that my kid would think it would be insane to procure or receive any city service if he couldn't do it on his phone from his bed. And so,
right.
The days of lining up for things are soon going to be far behind us, and cities are really needing to catch up on that front. So a lot of kind of transformation in those areas too.
So when you made that transformation, former city councilor, head of the TTC, as chair of the TTC, over to EY, what was the challenge in flipping that lens? Because you would have to have made that transition just mentally, I would think, in terms of how you now look at what goes on at City Hall versus how you did when you were in council.
Yeah, I mean, and two different ways. I mean, the first one was, just a real practical one. Like, how do you convert what and you think you've learned into something that, can add value, right? So you can't just kind of think deep thoughts, and people won't pay you very long for that. So there's that kind of really practical part of it. But the other thing that changes, and I maybe because I've grown up around politics, you realize that you get a bit of an inflated sense, right, of your lot in life when you're in elected office. And you're introduced in rooms. You sit at the head of a table. You're invited to lots of things. People want your time, and the longer you're in that game, that arena, I think, and I was always really conscious of this, the harder it is, I think, to lose all of those things. And I've seen it, right, with other colleagues who have been in it much longer than I, and who struggle making that transition. Like, can you take directions from a boss now? Can you be part of a bigger machine or a team? And I think everyone thinks they can, but that's an adjustment. And I think the longer you're in it, the harder that adjustment becomes. I mean, if you own your own business and run your show, I think probably going back is not hard. But if you become, kind of employee number whatever, I think a lot of former elected officials struggle with it. So I think I was lucky from the point of view that I was always conscious of that, and I knew that was going to come one day, because I'd seen it before close to home. But you have to kind of check your ego a bit too, making that transition.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that part of that, though, and when you talked about, beyond the big thoughts, the deep thinking, there's part of this, and we talk about it around here as the curse of knowledge, that there's certain things that are locked up in your brain that you kind of take for granted as based on the experience that you've got. And that's really what people want to hear from you. So what was the one thing that they wanted to pick your brain on based on, your new portfolio at EY?
Yeah, it's such a good point, right? Like you forget how much you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just in your kind of travels. I think what I was able to immediately offer was, so, let's say you're building a big transit project. I could immediately give them the perspective of the client or the would-be client and the kind of the pains and pressures that they'd be under. I always joke that when I was excited to become TTC chair, and I had asked for it, and then I, got the votes and got it. And then on day one, I was briefed on the subway extension project that was going to be like 4 years over, and I don't know how many billions over budget. So all of a sudden you've got to make decisions. And so you're the kind of project owner, and and have lived that. I think that was one of the things that immediately clients and prospective clients wanted from someone like me who had been on that other side, right? Who have lived it, know the pressures. I joke sometimes that at the beginning, very much, I was like the Rosetta Stone, where I could translate kind of what the need is from the minds and mouths of, say, a government client to, what business might be able to provide as a solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and needless to say, given the way government can be so cumbersome at times, and even large organizations,
Yes.
they're slow to move. So to have those opposing, they're not even moving parallel sometimes. No. They get kind of in their way at times. So to have that level of insight, I think probably helps. So over the course of the last, what has it been now, 7, 8 years?
No, 4.5.
4.5 years. So you were counsel for the 8 years, right?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So the 4.5 years since then, give me your sort of view. And I realize COVID has come in and sort of taken this huge chunk out of how we run City Hall, how we view city services. But just the same way I've talked about the food bank circumstance in this city, it's not going to go away just because COVID now is in the rearview mirror. We have reestablished sort of the foundation of so much of what we do. And I mean, I remember talking to John Tory back in December, asking him about longer term transit projects, for example. And he's quite committed, and as is I hear from, the various folks at the commission, that, no, we're going to need it because the city's going to grow and we have these longer term plans of population increases, et cetera. Except increasingly we hear that the actual culture of working downtown, of going downtown, is spread out so that I'm not going to go to the office 5 days a week. I might go 3. So even at that, measuring these longer term generational investments in things like transit, that lens has to be, shifted somewhat, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think we've done some of it, but not enough, and not maybe exhaustive enough of analysis. And I'm not one for just kind of paralysis by analysis, but I think we don't know. So in view of that, I mean, I think there are a few things we could or should be doing. One is that, and it never seems to get to the top of the page during election campaigns, but ultimately what most people want, whether you're going 3 days a week or 1 day a week, or just using transit socially, on the weekends, what the city can control are their own existing lines and vehicles and the surface on which they operate. There needs to be a kind of I think, a real pivot towards that, especially at the municipal level. The cost of expansion projects now were never, ever intended to be borne by a property tax base, even if you're only paying a third, right? Like the Ontario line is going to be 20 billion at current estimates. So like it's just not possible or sustainable. And that's part of the problem the city's in right now, having done that for 25 years since amalgamation. So I think where the change has to happen in an area like transit services that are delivered municipally is what can they control? And there's kind of the old adage or joke about like, it's amazing what you can do with like a bucket of paint if you want to make, say, a prioritized transit lane. And then all of a sudden, if it's moving faster and it's more reliable, everyone's more likely to take it. And the upfront capital costs are so different. So can we change signals? Can we change lanes of traffic? Can you change the type of service delivery? Does it have to all be 40-foot buses, running down kind of half empty down suburban streets? Or can you do like a smaller vehicle? Can you do something on demand? And so there needs to be, I think, a super refocus on getting the stuff you have and the people who are using it moving. I think then the bigger ones can take care of themselves over time. And these are long horizons, right? Like I'm amazed with how many people are still working from home, how busy the roads are in the city right now. I don't know where everyone's traveling to at midday if they're not going to work, but I think there needs to be a focus there. It's far fewer capital dollars. It's actually savings on even operating maintenance. And maybe the city or cities have to kind of say, we're not in the long-term big capital transit expansion game anymore. That's the jurisdiction of more, orders of government who can finance that type of project.
So given that, what you would suggest is that this should not be something that lands at council, that the TTC should be something that should be provincially overseen?
No, I think the TTC, I think the operation of transit is inherently local. There are some routes that may one day be seen as a regional type of route. I think the operations of it, I think the building of whatever the next line we'll draw on a map is, and they'll be hotly debated and it'll go through its process. Let the province and the feds pay for that 100%. And the city should be directing its resources to making sure that the Dufferin bus actually is reliable. Because no one will the reason people take a car over public transit is the spontaneity of travel and the ability to kind of go when you want to go to meet your schedule. The minute you're planning your travel, it's already a less attractive choice. And then if you get out there and you miss a bus, or it's raining, or you can't get on, or it's just stuck in traffic, it's not going to be a choice for many people. And so I think the local level, and this is not just in Toronto, I would say this across North America, has to, and agencies are doing it, focus on what you can control and you can deliver now. So there's going to be a great debate about a waterfront LRT. Well, what are you doing now to start to build up ridership, make it smooth, make it seamless and safe and reliable? You can do things. You can have an express bus route. You can have dedicated lanes, and those aren't big costs. And you know what? The city doesn't have to seek approval from anyone to do it. So I kind of, this has been a bit of a change of heart since I've been out. You kind of see the world differently and see the length and cost of these projects in a more intimate way. I think that really can be the role of cities and municipalities. And then, if you start to, God forbid, integrate it with, hey, we regulate ride sharing and we control parking lots and parking pricing. We're in the bike share business too. We decide where those go and what they cost. Now all of a sudden, with no approval needed from anyone else, you can start to maybe actually make it easier to get around the city, God forbid. So I used to always laugh that the TTC used to have to beg and plead and maybe move a motion at council to get Toronto bike share bikes at a subway station. It's kind of crazy. It's not like, oh, darn you, province. Do it tomorrow. And then all of a sudden, maybe someone will take the subway home because they'll bike the last leg to get closer to home. So things like that kind of, to me, seem so obvious and maybe let you escape the drama of LRT, subway, Scarborough, North York, and all those kind of things that we seem to get buried in.
When you look at the pressures and specifically the financial pressures at City Hall, and whether or not there's ever going to be a check coming from the province or the feds is another debate for another time. But part of the conversation in that budget process a couple months ago, vis-a-vis the TTC, was the reduction of service on a significant number of lines. I think it was 40-something routes, something like that. Having said all of that, and to your point about having a suburban bus, and you need the buses to run through the suburban neighborhoods, you just need them. But just the idea of, do I need the 40-foot bus? I can sit at my front window in the living room, and every 15 minutes there's a bus goes by there, and more often than not, it's just the driver in the bus, right? And at the end of the day, the beginning of the day, for sure, there was a point where the express bus used to run that route, go right downtown, and that was I would take that bus in the morning because I could count on it and would get me to, Wellington and University in a reasonable amount of time. And it was easy to do. I wasn't paying the $35 a day to park and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
COVID went away. So did the express bus. It hasn't come back. Mm-hmm. There are things on those routes, to your point, that, okay, now there's no incentive for me to take the transit anymore, right? Yeah. Otherwise, it's a convoluted route and 5 transfers.
Yeah. Yeah, and that one kind of one seat, one ride is huge, right? Like every study since mass transit became a thing shows that if you have to kind of transfer like that, even if your ride's longer, you'd probably more likely take it if you could have that one seat. So it's interesting that, and European cities are so different, right? Like just built differently and so much more compact, and the same with the way kind of some Asian cities have developed, But certainly in North America, what you're seeing, a lot because of the pandemic and also because of fiscal pressures, but also because of people wanting reliable service, you're starting to see these hybrid models of, instead of that empty 40-foot bus running through a neighborhood, they've actually introduced on demand, where it's like a ride sharing app, but it's being provided by your municipal transit provider. And it's actually just coming to your door, or at least to an intersection quite close to you, exactly when you need it. And it's bringing you to the really rapid bus route or the subway. Mm-hmm. And so that throws people initially because it's different and it feels different. And sometimes there's labor issues because if in cities where they've switched to a bus that's being provided by a unionized worker to say a private taxi company, those create challenges. But let's assume that's not an issue and it's provided by the same driver, just a smaller vehicle that could be more responsive. It's cheaper for the municipality. Ridership goes through the roof. And then it starts to build people's build up that kind of familiarity again, so that people are back in, kind of the game of not relying only on their personal vehicle that they're in by themselves. So Edmonton's done that recently, and initially there was pushback, but it's been wildly successful since. Durham region, just to the east of Toronto, is doing it. And they're not doing it on major routes. They're doing it on the smaller ones that don't have a lot of ridership. And because of it, you're not providing as frequent service. And once this bus is only coming once every half an hour, I'm sorry, no one's using it. Like, you can't plan your life like that. So that's something that I'm not saying it has to be in every neighborhood, but maybe it's in 4 neighborhoods in Toronto as a pilot and try it. And one thing cities learned in the pandemic is we can actually do things a lot quicker than we've always ever said and explained away with rules and policies.
Yeah.
So call it a pilot and try it. Try another express lane somewhere. Have some priority signals for the bus on Dufferin. Like, just try them. And if they don't work, stop them. And Toronto, I think, in particular, because it's so big, the corporation of the city of Toronto, there's so many smart people, there's so much oversight that it's not in the DNA and the culture of that organization to try things and actually embrace the failing part of it. It's okay to fail. If my idea sucks, stop it.
Move on. Yeah.
Yeah. And try another one and try another one. Yep. And then try another one.
But is there a culture that invites that kind of innovative thinking? Right. There's the problem, right?
No. I used to know when I was a counselor, if I wanted something and a meeting was set up to try and solve it or fix it, I would walk in a room and there'd be 14 people. And that was my immediate cue that it wasn't happening.
Right.
Because there's a lot of this. And nobody owns it then. If I walked in a room where there's 2 people, I was like, you know what? Maybe something's going to get done here. And I actually, working with a lot of different cities, one of the things I've noticed is some of the smaller cities don't have the luxury of being able to have something run through 19 approval levels. They're not that many people or departments. And so some of those mid-sized cities, and you see it in the States too, some of those mid-sized cities are just, because of the way they're built, able to try things. And they don't all become permanent programs or policies, but they try them. So it requires some change in culture. The old adage is that culture is established at the top. It'll be a test for the strong mayor system, and then we'll have a new mayor. We know that for sure. How will they change the culture on things like that? That will improve people's lives way more than the percentage service level that is set for the TTC, or the policy on traffic safety, or climate change goals. It'll be a willingness to create a culture of kind of, I would say, of action, and of embracing some of the kind of the risk and reward that comes with trying things.
That's getting swamped though for a bunch of reasons, just because typically beyond a mandate, the council wouldn't be looking that far down the road. Having said that, you make a good point. There's stuff you can do right now, so let's just sort of focus on that. But where they're getting bogged down, and I don't say this to be dismissive, is that there's a real concern about safety and violence on.
Yeah, that's real.
So what do you do about that in the short term? I mean, I hear John Burnside on talking about, well, this, that, and the other thing, but that's a soon come solution that we keep hearing. How do we, first of all, address it? And then second, make me feel like, okay, that's making a difference, and I'm going to take my kids and grandkids on the bus.
Which I think is, to me, that's the crux of a lot of it. So my advice, and I may have even given this, is the first thing you need to do is let people like like tangibly and visibly, to understand what they're doing that's making it safer. Right? It being lost in a report at a committee is not what's going to kind of change the hearts and mind and give you or I the comfort to, take your kid on the system. So I think telling that story and really tangibly showing, I used to always, know how good Andy Byford, who was an amazing communicator, would do things. And so he becomes the head of the TTC, and all of a sudden he tells us that we have a cleanliness issue. I didn't know that we did, but now I kind of, and you know what I know? I know what things are happening about it. And I see like scorecards. You couldn't walk through a TTC elevator or door or office room without seeing the scorecard, and cleanliness being one of them. And we're at 92%, now 93%. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Safer. It's cleaner. People care. Was that an issue? I don't know. But he kind of made it and told us and delivered progress on it. So I think there are wins like that. I think TTC is doing a lot of them. But make sure you tell them, I'm on the system a lot. And there's this repeating message about, if you see something, say something around safety. And they've clearly started playing it more than they used to. But I'm like, I don't know if that's the issue.
Right.
Like that's not like, and so even a little thing like that, like even the messaging on the system, I don't think that's what people need to hear.
Well, it implies there's a problem that you're not solving.
Yeah. Or like, what should I be,
Yeah. What am I worried about?
So I think I would, I hate to even quote the person who popularized this in New York City, but there is a bit of the broken window phenomena happening on the TTC. Mm-hmm. And this is not a Toronto issue. This is every transit system in North America. The struggles that have happened in the prairies, what you've heard, this really tragic stories in Vancouver and Burnaby, it's a significant issue. So to their credit, I know Burnside says it and Leary says it, that some of this is bigger than transit. And it's true, right? Like if some of these incidents happen on the path, in downtown Toronto, I'm not sure it's like a path issue. I just think there are public spaces that, these things are happening in. So yes, that's of course, but I think there is a bit of a broken window, and I would say it sounds trivial or maybe, I don't know, a bit simplistic, but I would do the biggest cleaning blitz on that system it's ever seen. And I would make sure everyone knew about it. I would make sure that, you hear about it on the news the way we do weekend closures, and that you notice it when you go back on Monday morning. because then you maybe start to feel that someone cares and the people around. I think they've done a really good job of making sure that TTC employees are more visible, but I would triple and quadruple down on that. You know what? Teams should be having their meetings in their vests for 20 minutes on the system. You know what? Like contractors, there's a policy that you're supposed to wear TTC identification if you're a contractor, right? Because if you're just like working on a vent shaft down there, does anyone know you're actually? But put the badge on, make it policy, put the vest on so that people see that around, right? So I think there are little things like that. And then at a certain point, for some of these bigger, broader issues that are, I would say, citywide and national issues, there needs to be a conversation and funding that starts to address some of these root issues that have become way more acute since the pandemic. And I noticed it. I've worked around kind of Queen and Bay now for 12, 13 years. And like downtown changed during and after the pandemic. It's different.
Yeah.
And
entirely.
It's different. It's got a different feel. And that has all extended onto public spaces like transit. And so there's something bigger, and there's some awkward and uncomfortable conversations that come with it. And it has to happen with federal and provincial support.
When you talk about Andy Byford, one of the lightning in a bottle, secret sauce, whatever you want to call it, was his willingness to be present and seen to be present. Yeah. It was almost a meme in and of itself. You know, if there was a problem on whatever bus line or subway line, he'd have the vest on at some point, and he'd be showing up, helping people get onto the right bus at the right time. And it sounds like a small, almost a cliched thing to do. But I wonder whether or not we're at that point where we need that level of presence from leadership on the transit system. I think we do. I wouldn't underestimate, and I would even chuckle at it sometimes, right? Because I was his boss. I'd be like, "Oh, Andy," but he cared. It was sincere. You know, he did the same thing in New York, and New York's a tough town. And before you know it, he's the most popular person in that city, and he's doing 60 Minutes. Because he was present, right? So even little things which I know they continue to do today, like if you're a senior management, you're on the system, wear your name tag. And I get it. Like there are probably some days where you're like, I just want to go home. I don't want to give someone directions or whatever it might be. But I think so. And I think, again, whoever wins this mayoralty election, you talk about culture, that's something that's set, right? Doesn't just, it can evolve in a bad way, but you can set it and change it, right? And that has to start at the top. And I think and we can do a whole nother show on whether it's smart to have this smart mayor system or not. But there is no question, if you talk to the most senior people at the city and the TTC, like they now know who their boss is. And I don't know if it's the best thing, but that's the reality. It's the mayor. And so with that comes also, people talk about, oh, you've got all these added powers. In my mind, I sound like a Spider-Man comic. Comes with added power, with power comes responsibility, right? And so part of that, I believe, as we evolve in this new system, is you're kind of the CEO now too. And so you set the culture, you set the standard, you be present. And you make sure that your leadership group knows that that's what's expected of them. And it's quite clear. And I think that, again, this is a big issue, and it's easy for me to kind of just pontificate on it. But I think that will certainly help. And to your point, it's how safe do you feel to start to go back to transit, right? And that's what starts to make the difference. And and as you describe that, I think of, Doug Ford getting out of the car with his shovel and helping somebody get out of a snowbank.
His little shovel.
It's all about that. Before we go, we're up to 50 candidates now on the ballot. I'm not sure that really affects much. We're starting to see some polling, which I think is entirely useless. I talked to David Coletto at Abacus a couple of weeks ago. He says the horse race polling is going to be spread so thinly
Yeah.
over this based on the number of people on the ballot, the sample size in terms of the people they're talking about. But he's saying what you need to watch are the issues that are emerging. And the latest one came out today was focusing on worries around crime in the neighborhood, that there's a perception that, I'm a little bit more worried walking in a place within a kilometer of my home alone at night. And, we used to live down at the St. Lawrence Market when the kids were small. Never, ever had an issue. My wife would walk to the hospital at St. Mike's from our place and do, late at night or early in the morning, just because it was easy and she enjoyed the walk. Now you get down to that neighborhood and a lot of people are more than shaky about it. And that kind of goes along the lines, do I feel more comfortable walking along Queen Street at 5 a.m. or taking the streetcar at 5 a.m?
Yeah.
What's the toss up, right?
Yeah.
So I think those issues are going to be critical. I'm not sure it plays into Mark Saunders' bailiwick.
Yeah.
I just think it's an overall attitude and concern right across the board, no matter
It is.
where you're living.
It is. And you're right about that. I think in a race like this, some we talked about it, I think before, some people are going to go in with some name recognition. So they're going to naturally pull a bit higher. But what you're going to see, I think, in the coming weeks is you're going to feel the race chasing these issues. So as polls like that come out, and they have access to more than that, and they'll be doing that on issues much more than how they're doing, you're going to start to see policy announcements, even repositioning of themselves as the person most able to handle an issue like safety. And so the actions of campaigns really is actually a super good indicator of what the best polls are telling them, right? They're basically, it's a cue to all of us what their polling is telling them. And you're going to start to see that. And I think that's what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. And I think, May, you said May's around the corner, because remember, you're not really in this race unless you're on the ballot. And that doesn't happen until May 12th. And so this next run up to that, kind of cutoff is going to be about trying to own an issue and be seen as the person that is best or most likely being able to handle it. And so I think you're going to see a bit of a scramble from everyone in the coming days. You might see some kind of prank, even like feeling announcements that people who are lower on the ballot trying to get attention. You might see some people go after each other if they're perceived to be the one who is strongest on that issue. But yeah, it's these issues, and I still think it's largely the safety one until something else changes.
Does I know name recognition matters, but does Olivia Chow's entrance into this race really change much?
I think, so my sense was that the left, and when I say the left, I more mean like the NDP and people who really, it's always said there are no parties municipally. That's not true. Officially, there aren't. There's always been an NDP party municipally, and they're organized. They're organized as councillors, as during election time, and that group of lots of residents and citizens who would maybe vote and lean that way still were feeling like I think they needed their standard bearer. And there was a discussion about whether they kind of go to Matlow or go to Bailao as the progressive choice. But I think many still wanted someone who was, part of that team. And so they have it now. And so I think some votes will go there. So it does splinter the left more so. But it'll be interesting to your point. If the issue is crime and safety, and we start to see the candidates and the campaigns and the whole election chase that, it'll be really interesting to see how kind of the quote unquote progressive candidates position their platforms and their campaigning.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the most interesting number in the horse race numbers today were 43% undecided. So I think it actually speaks to what you were just
that undecided guy always seems to have lots of support.
That's it, then, indeed. Josh Colle, good of you to join us. Thanks for being here.
good to be here, Dave. These are interesting times and definitely an important election. I know that we say that every time, but I think we all kind of feel it. Let's just hope people vote. So that'll be the next test.
Well, I think 6 months from now, I wonder, if we're going to have sort of buyer's remorse or remorse because we didn't get out and actually get engaged in this. That's going to be the polling that I think would be interesting to do.
Really good point. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for this.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.